Okay, 7.6, solving rational inequalities. This is the last section before the exam. If I haven't done so already, I'll send out specific instructions on how to take the upcoming exam. It has to be done in person. So if you're near CCD, you'll have to take it in the CCD testing center. If you're not, you're going to have to start to look for an official testing center in your area that I can submit it to. Most colleges will have something like that. But anyways, I'll explain the specifics. They all should be there, and then if you have any questions, you can shoot me an email or come to my office hours or something like that. Okay, this section is fairly short, which is good. In fact, we're only going to go over one process. The only issue is that process is kind of fairly involved. And so if we're solving rational inequalities, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to have 0 on one side of the equation. So if that hasn't happened in an equation yet, we need to move everything to one side. The second thing we need to do is we need to factor anything if it isn't already factored. So kind of dealt with those first two steps already in this example. I have 0 on one side of my inequality, I have my expression on the other side, and everything is fully factored. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my critical points. And I find my critical points by setting each of the factors equal to 0 and then solving. So my two critical points are 2 and -4. Now, since we're dealing with an inequality, we're going to pull out that number line again and kind of see what this will look like. And on this number line, I'm going to set my two factors to the left side of the number line, just like that. And I'm going to put dotted lines on my critical numbers. Those are going to kind of divide things into the region. And that's a critical number, and this is true in calculus as well, is it's kind of where things are going to change or things are going to happen. And so we're going to determine what's going to happen in between those and outside of those points, because we know at those dotted lines things are going to change. The next step is to pick a number in the region, and this could be any number. It just has to be within the region. So I chose for my left region -6, I chose for my middle region 0, I chose for my right region 3. You could have picked -10, -2, and 30. As long as you're picking something that falls into that region, the process will be the same. So what we do now is we determine the sign of each of our factors using that number. So we picked -6 for the region that's the furthest left on that number line. Well, -6 plus 4 will get me -2. -6 minus 2 will get me -8. And then I'm going to put those negative signs, if we look back over to the number line, I'm going to put those number signs in those regions next to each factor. And the truth of the matter is, those numbers don't really matter. All I'm concerned about is the sign. So that's what I was talking about. If you picked a different number, like -10, you'll get different numbers, but you should still get that the top factor is going to be negative in that region, and the bottom factor is going to be negative in that region. And now I repeat that. So for my middle region, this space between those two dotted lines, I'm going to pick 0. And I'm going to plug that into x plus 4. That gets me +4. I'm going to put a +4 on my number line over there on the left side. 0 minus 2 gets me -2. I'm going to put a negative sign over in my number line. And one more region I have to cover. I'm going to plug in 3. First factor gets me 7. I put a plus on my number line over there in that spot. And 3 minus 2 gets me 1, so I put a positive sign in that spot over on the number line as well. Now, next step is to figure out kind of what's happening overall in that region. And so for my first region, I have a negative times a negative. That will get me a positive. I have a positive times a negative. Well, that would get me a negative result. And a positive times a positive will get me a positive. Now, we did this long and involved process, and I probably should have explained why we're doing it, but I'm going to go ahead and do that right now so we can kind of tie everything together. The question is asking, when is x minus 2 over x plus 4 greater than or equal to 0? Well, I determined kind of the behavior of each of these regions, And so I want to know when that is bigger than or equal to 0. So I look back over at my number line. Well, it's bigger than or equal to 0 in 2 spots. Everything less than -4 and everything bigger than 2. And now all I have to do at this point is I have to describe that region in interval notation. So the leftmost region is from -infinity up to -4. And the rightmost region is 2 up to +infinity. Now you might be asking yourself, well, it's weird that one of the numbers has a bracket and the other number doesn't have a bracket on it. What's happening there? Well, if you look back at the expression, I see that if I plug in -4 into that expression, that would mean I was dividing by 0, which I'm not allowed to do. So even though overall I'm dealing with a greater than or equal to, which generally means that I have brackets on every number, I have to be careful with the fact that I'm dealing with rational inequalities. And so anytime that your factor is on the bottom, that critical number should not have a bracket on it. So let's see another example of this. Might not be a bad idea to watch that one again. Might not be a bad idea to watch this one again. Because like I said, this is a fairly short lecture. So if this isn't the last slide, there might be one more slide to go through. So really kind of focus on just gathering the individual slides as well as you can. So in this case, I'm going to treat it as though I'm solving a rational equation. And so my LCD is 2x squared. All of those denominators fit into 2x squared. So I would multiply everything by 2x squared. I would cancel out my denominators. I would subtract over 6x. And then I would factor. So now I kind of fall into that process that we've seen before of, okay, now I have my two factors, I'm going to find my critical numbers. My critical numbers are going to be 2 and 4. And so when I'm setting up my number line, I'm going to put dashed lines on 2 and 4. I get that from the 2 and 4 by setting x minus 2 is equal to 0 and setting x minus 4 is equal to 0. Now I'm going to pick numbers. And so I don't think I wrote it out explicitly in this example, but let's say I pick -2 for my left region. -2 minus 2 would get me -4, so that's going to get me negative. -2 minus 4 gets me -6, so that will also be negative. Now I have to pick something between 2 and 4. You could pick fractions if you want to, but in this case, let's just stick with a whole number and pick 3. My top factor is going to get me +1, positive. And my bottom factor is going to get me -1, so negative. And then for my last region, let's just pick 5. 5 minus 2 is 3, so that's positive. 5 minus 4 is 1, so that is also positive. Now I'm going to look back up at my inequality and see that I want to, I think it may have cut out. Huh. Let's try this. Okay, so it cut out the bottom for some reason, but that's not super important. I'm just going to change it into this format so we can see everything that is on the slide. And so where we left off is that we had all of our regions figured out. We had a minus, minus, plus, minus, plus, plus. And we were looking back at my inequality to see, okay, that has to be less than 0. So I want to figure out every time, everywhere that this is my inequality will be less than 0. My number line will be less than 0. So look at my first region, it's positive. I don't want that region. My rightmost region is positive. I don't want that region. All I'm concerned about is my middle region. And so to describe that middle region, you have 2 to 4. And since it's a less than sign, those numbers are going to be in parentheses 2, 4. So I don't really have to deal with the fact that I might have something on the bottom of my fraction because it's just a less than sign. It's not a less than or equal to sign, so I wouldn't have bracket on anything anyways. And that's it for this lecture. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. You can show up to my office hours. Otherwise, good luck on your exam.